Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a subject I know a lot of you are interested in. Judging by the stack of sources you sent in, the art of persuasion.
Oh, yeah. A fascinating area. There's so much to unpack from
Hmm.
psychology and communication to, well, even some ancient wisdom.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of which, one of the books that really caught my eye was a Arte de Persuasão by James Borg. You know, a book means business when it gets a glowing recommendation from a business legend like, John Harvey Jones.
Ah, right. The guy who
Foundation.
took a company from a 200 million loss to a 1 billion profit in just 30 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone knows how to get people on board with an idea, it's definitely him. So let's dive in.
So our mission today is twofold, I think. First, we got to uncover the core principles of persuasion, right? Those techniques that make someone truly influential.
Right.
But also, we've got to figure out how to recognize when those techniques are being used on us so we can, be a little more discerning.
It's exactly. Be a more discerning listener and decision maker. It's not just about wielding the power of persuasion. It's about understanding how it works so you don't get caught off guard.
So, where do we begin with this? The book dives into a lot of areas, but it seems like it all comes back to psychology, right? Understanding why people do the things they do.
Yeah, exactly. You're spot on. It's not about trickery, persuasion. It's about influence. And that starts with recognizing what motivates people. It's all about, well, the book actually calls it the ESP formula.
Hmm.
Empathy plus sincerity equals persuasion.
Now, hold on. ESP, are we taking a detour into the paranormal? I didn't sign up for like mind reading here.
No, no, don't worry. No crystal balls in this deep dive. It's just good old-fashioned emotional intelligence. Understanding the other person's perspective, their needs, their values, even if they're different from your own.
Oh, I see. Okay, so before you can even think about persuading someone, you need to establish that genuine connection, right? Like, I get you.
Precisely. And once you have that empathy as a foundation, that's where sincerity comes in. Because people can sense when you're genuine, when you actually believe in what you're saying.
Right, right, right. I mean, we can all spot a phony sales pitch a mile away. We're more likely to be persuaded by someone who's like authentic and passionate, right?
Absolutely. Now, the book also touches on some classic persuasion concepts. Aristotle's three pillars of rhetoric, ethos, pathos, and logos. Always fascinating to see how these ancient ideas still hold true today.
Those always sounded kind of intimidating to me. Can you break those down for us non-philosophers?
Of course, of course. So ethos is all about credibility. It's about how trustworthy and knowledgeable you appear to your audience. You're more likely to trust a doctor's advice on health than, say, a random person on the street.
Right, 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 right. Because we assume the doctor has the expertise and the experience, so it's not just what you say, but who you are.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Pathos, on the other hand, appeals to emotions, connecting with the audience on a deeper level, tapping into their feelings and values. Think about those commercials that show adorable puppies to encourage donations to animal shelters.
Ah, yes. The classic heartstring tugging tactic. Yeah, they're not just presenting facts, they're making you feel something.
Right. And finally, logos. Logos is all about logic and reason, using facts, statistics, evidence, to support your argument. If you're trying to convince someone to, say, invest in your business, you'd use logos by showing them like market research and financial projections.
So it's about appealing to their rational side, showing them the cold, hard facts.
Exactly. And the book really emphasizes that effective persuasion usually involves a blend of all three, ethos, pathos, logos.
It's like a recipe for persuasion, a dash of credibility, sprinkle of emotion, and a solid foundation of logic.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Now, the book also dives deeper into specific techniques that build on these foundations, starting with something we often take for granted, listening.
Oh, listening. I'll admit, that's one I struggle with. It's so easy to get caught up thinking about what I'm going to say next that I totally miss what the other person's saying.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. It's easy to do in our world of distractions. Our minds tend to, run ahead of the speaker. But here's a surprising statistic from the book. People spend more time listening than they do speaking, reading, or writing combined.
Whoa, really? That's a lot of listening. It seems like if we're spending that much time doing it, we should probably, be better at it.
Exactly. And the book highlights the difference between passively hearing words and really actively listening. It's
Mhm.
about being present, paying attention not just to the words, but to the tone, the body language, the emotions behind the words.
So it's not just about absorbing information, it's about understanding the context, right?
Right.
The subtext, the whole message.
Exactly. The book actually gives this funny example. A husband so engrossed in a football game that he barely acknowledges his wife, even though he could repeat her words back to her,
Yeah.
verbatim. It's funny because it's so relatable, right?
Oh, I know that scenario all too well, but it highlights how we can tune out even when we think we're paying attention.
Yeah. And that kind of selective hearing can really damage relationships, and it can hinder our ability to influence others. Think
Yeah.
about it. How can you persuade someone if you aren't truly listening to their concerns, their perspective?
Good point. So what's the antidote to this selective hearing? How do we become better listeners?
Well, the book has some practical tips. First, resist the urge to interrupt. Seems obvious, but it's a surefire way to show you're more interested in your own thoughts than the other person's.
Like that saying, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Another tip, don't finish people's sentences. Even if you think you know what they're going to say, let them express themselves fully. It shows respect, and it allows them to feel heard.
It's also a good way to avoid putting words in their mouth, right? Sometimes we're way off base with our assumptions.
You got it. And when you truly listen, you gather valuable information. You can actually use that to tailor your communication for greater impact. You might even pick up on unspoken cues that reveal what the other person really wants or needs.
That's fascinating. So listening becomes a form of intelligence gathering almost, helping you understand motivations and tailor your message.
Right. Now, here's a question for you. How often do you catch yourself tuning out during conversations? And what impact could that be having, not just on your relationships, but also your ability to connect with people?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's something I'm definitely going to be more mindful of moving forward. But listening's just one piece of the communication puzzle, right? What about nonverbal communication? It seems like so much of what we convey and what we perceive happens beyond words.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The book actually has this great quote. Generally, we are betrayed by the extremities of our body since we have less control over our hands and feet.
That's intriguing. What exactly does that mean?
It means our nonverbal cues, our body language, our facial expressions, even how we stand or sit, they can reveal a lot about our true feelings and intentions, often without us even realizing it.
Right, like when someone says they're fine but their shoulders are slumped and they're avoiding eye contact, you know something's up.
Exactly. And the book goes into different categories of nonverbal communication. There's body language, obviously,
Yeah.
but also spatial relationships, how close or far we stand from others, and paralanguage.
Paralanguage. Okay, that's a new one.
It refers to the vocal cues that go along with our words. Tone of voice, pitch, volume, pauses. You could say the exact same words. That's a great idea. But depending on your tone, it could be enthusiasm, sarcasm, even boredom.
Wow. It's amazing how much nuance we can convey with just our voices. I'm realizing just how much of communication goes beyond the words themselves, like a whole other language we're speaking without realizing it.
And the book provides some insightful examples of how this silent language works. For instance, did you know that a lack of eye contact can signal disagreement, even if someone verbally agrees? Or how quickly we form judgments about someone just based on their appearance?
It's true. We make snap judgments based on clothes, hairstyle, posture. It's not always fair, but we all do it. So how do we harness this power of nonverbal communication? How do we become more persuasive by understanding and using these subtle cues?
Well, first, become more aware of your own nonverbal signals. Are you sending mixed messages? Is your body language contradicting your words?
Oh, guilty as charged on that one sometimes. I'll be trying to appear confident, but my voice will be shaky and I'll be, fidgeting nervously. It's like my body's betraying my intention.
We've all been there. But by being more self-aware, you can start to control those nonverbal cues and project the image you want.
And what about reading other people's nonverbal signals? How do we get better at that?
Just pay attention. Observe those facial expressions, their body language, their tone of voice. Are they leaning in, engaged, or leaning back, arms crossed, looking distracted?
It's like becoming a human lie detector, except we're not trying to catch them in a lie. We're just trying to understand their true feelings, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you're more attuned to those nonverbal cues, you can adjust your communication style accordingly. Someone seems closed off. Maybe soften your approach. Someone seems enthusiastic. Maybe be more assertive.
Makes me think of those social chameleons. The ones who just effortlessly adapt to any situations. Like they instinctively know how to read the room and adjust their behavior to get the desired response.
That's a great way to put it. And that adaptability is a hallmark of a truly persuasive communicator. Now, let's shift gears a little and talk about the role of memory in persuasion.
Okay. This is one I need help with for sure. I'm notorious for forgetting names, especially in large groups. It's so embarrassing.
Don't worry, you're not alone. The book delves into the magic of memory and why most people get it wrong. We think of memory as, capacity, but it's more about how we encode and associate information.
So it's not that I have a bad memory, it's that I'm not using the right techniques.
Exactly. And the book offers really practical advice on how to improve memory, particularly with names. For instance, did you know that simply making a conscious effort to remember someone's name can make a huge difference?
Really? That sounds too simple.
It might sound simple, but it's incredibly effective. When someone introduces themselves, pay attention. Repeat their name back to them. It's nice to meet you, John. That repetition solidifies the connection in your mind.
Okay, I can do that. What else?
Look for creative ways to associate names with faces. Does their name remind you of someone you know? Does their face have any distinctive features you can link to their name?
Ooh, like if someone's name's Sandy and they have bright blonde hair, you could picture them on a sandy beach with the sun reflecting off their hair.
Exactly. The more vivid and unusual the association, the more likely you are to remember it. And here's where it gets really interesting. Remembering names is just the beginning. The book goes on to talk about the power of remembering those small details about people, hobbies, their interests, recent events in their lives.
Because when you show you remember those details, it shows you care, that you are truly listening.
Precisely. It says, "You're important to me. I value our connection." And that can be incredibly persuasive.
Wow, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Empathy, listening, nonverbal communication, memory, they're all interconnected.
Exactly. They all contribute to our overall persuasive power. So here's a practical challenge. Try to remember one new detail about each person you talk to today. Could be their favorite coffee order or their upcoming vacation plans. You might be surprised how much more persuasive you become just by showing that you're paying attention.
I love that challenge. It's a great way to put these principles into practice and become a more engaging communicator. Now, we've talked about how our words and actions can influence others, but what about the words themselves? Do certain words hold more persuasive power than others?
That is a great question, and that's where the fascinating field of psycholinguistics comes in.
Psycholinguistics sounds complicated.
It's actually pretty simple. It's the study of how words affect our thoughts and emotions.
So, like how certain words can make us feel happy, sad, angry.
Exactly. And the book gives some really interesting examples of how word choices can shape public perception. One example is the shift from global warming to climate change.
Oh, interesting. Why? They're basically talking about the same thing, right?
They are, but the words evoke different feelings. Global warming sounds, well, more alarming, more threatening, evokes a sense of urgency, maybe even fear. Climate change, on the other hand, sounds more neutral, scientific, perhaps less daunting.
So, by simply changing the wording, they subtly shifted the public's perception, making it seem less like a crisis and more like a gradual process.
Exactly. It's a subtle but powerful example of how language can be used to persuade. And the book goes on to examine this phenomenon in more detail using scientific research. For example, there are studies showing that people are more likely to support environmental policies when it's framed as climate change rather than global warming.
That's incredible. Like we're constantly being, nudged and swayed by language without realizing it.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of these techniques.
Yeah.
To be able to decode the messages we're receiving, make informed decisions, spot the subtle ways language is being used to influence us.
Absolutely. Now, beyond choosing the right words, are there specific types of questions that are particularly effective, like in persuasion?
That's a great question. The book dives into the art of asking questions and how important it is to use the right type of question for the desired effect.
Hmm.
It's not just about getting information, it's about using questions strategically,
Yeah.
to guide the conversation and influence the outcome.
Okay, so what kind of questions are we talking about here?
Well, there are open questions and closed questions. Closed questions typically elicit a simple yes or no response. Do you like pizza? Open questions invite a more detailed, expansive answer. What are your favorite types of pizza and why?
Right, so open questions encourage people to share more information, reveal their their thoughts and feelings. It's like you're inviting them to open up and elaborate, right? Not just give a one-word answer.
Exactly. The book also talks about why questions. Asking why can help uncover the underlying motivations and beliefs.
Mm.
It's digging deeper, getting to the heart of it, rather than just staying on the surface.
This is making me rethink how I ask questions. It's not just about getting information, it's about using them strategically to guide the conversation, maybe even influence the outcome. Like being a detective using questions to uncover clues.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And speaking of getting things wrong, the book shares this funny anecdote that highlights the importance of clear communication and careful word choice. Someone confusing a business with a competitor, leading to this hilarious but ultimately embarrassing situation.
Oh no. I can only imagine the awkwardness. But it shows how even a small miscommunication can have big consequences.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to choose our words carefully and be mindful of how they might be interpreted. Sometimes a slip of the tongue can derail a whole conversation or even a relationship.
So we've covered a lot here. The foundations of persuasion, the power of listening, nonverbal communication, the magic of memory, and the art of choosing the right words. Is there anything else to consider when it comes to like understanding and influencing others?
There is. And that's where personality types come into play. Because different people respond to different communication styles. What works for one person might completely backfire with another.
Okay, this is starting to sound like a personality test. Are we about to delve into Myers-Briggs or...
Not quite. The book focuses on Carl Jung's personality types, specifically introversion, extroversion, and sensing intuition.
Okay, so introversion versus extroversion, I think most people are familiar with that. Introverts tend to be more reserved, inward focused, while extroverts are more outgoing, energized by, social interaction.
Exactly. And the book gives these relatable examples of how these differences show up in everyday life, like the chatty passenger on an airplane who strikes up a conversation with anyone versus a quiet passenger who prefers to read or listen to music.
I can definitely relate to both of those types. Sometimes I'm the chatty one, sometimes I just want to be left alone with my thoughts.
It's all about context and preference. But the takeaway is that understanding these preferences can help you tailor your communication style for greater impact.
So if you're trying to persuade an introvert, you might want to be more subtle and nuanced in your approach, whereas with an extrovert, you might be more direct and energetic. It's about meeting people where they are, speaking their language.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that effective communication isn't one size fits all, right? It's about tailoring your message to the individual you're interacting with.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on communication. It's not just about being articulate, it's about understanding the nuances of personality and adapting.
And that adaptability is a key skill in persuasion. Now, let's tackle another challenge that often comes up in our interactions with others, dealing with difficult people.
Ooh, this is a good one. We all have those people in our lives, the ones who just seem to push our buttons no matter how hard we try.
Yeah, it's like no matter how much we learn about communication, there's always that one person who makes us want to like throw the rule book out the window. I hear you. But even with those quote-unquote difficult people, understanding the psychology behind their behavior can give us, more tools to navigate those interactions. The book suggests that a lot of difficult behavior stems from unmet expectations and boundary violations.
Okay, can you give us like an example of that?
Sure. So imagine you're meeting with, say, a potential client. They show up with this absolutely massive briefcase just overflowing with papers.
So like a bit of an overpacker. Is that really a difficult person though?
It's not about the briefcase itself. It's about what it might represent. They're bringing this weight, this baggage into the meeting. It creates a sense of being overwhelmed, maybe like they're not fully present.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. It's not about judging their organizational skills. It's about how that behavior might impact the interaction. So how do we handle those situations where someone's behavior, intentional or not, is making things, well, difficult?
Well, the book breaks down some common difficult types and offers strategies for each. For example, let's take the classic know-it-all.
Ugh, yes. We all know one. They always have to be right, even when they're clearly not.
Right. The key here is to avoid getting drawn into a power struggle. Instead of contradicting them directly, try asking open-ended questions. Encourage them to explain their reasoning.
So like instead of saying, that's just wrong, you might say something like, can you help me understand how you came to that conclusion?
Exactly. It lets them feel heard and respected while potentially, revealing the flaws in their logic.
It's almost like you're using their ego against them.
You could say that. Now, another tricky personality type is the meticulous and methodical
Mhm.
person, all about the details,
Mm.
always following the rules to a T.
Oh, I know that type. Working with them can be challenging, especially if you're like more spontaneous and flexible in your approach.
Yeah, totally. The key with them is to be prepared, be organized, give them all the information they need well in advance, be clear and structured in your communication. Basically, speak your language.
Okay, so if they feel like things are in order and they have all the details, they're more likely to be on board. Makes sense. What about the incessant talker, the one who never seems to take a breath? How do you handle that without being rude?
Ah, yes. The incessant talker, a classic challenge. The key here is to gently but firmly steer the conversation back on track. Use polite interruptions like, that's interesting, but could we circle back to, or summarize their points to bring the conversation to a close?
Right, setting those boundaries again, right. You appreciate their input, but you got to stay focused.
Exactly. And this brings up a really important point.
Yeah.
The book encourages us to consider our own boundaries. What behaviors from others do we find annoying, disrespectful?
Mhm.
And how can we communicate those boundaries more effectively? To avoid conflict and maintain our own sense of, well, agency.
That's a great point. We often focus on handling other people's difficult behaviors, but it's just as important to recognize and assert our own boundaries.
Absolutely. And having strong boundaries actually makes you more persuasive. It projects confidence, self-respect, and people are more likely to respect your opinions if you respect yourself.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for navigating those interactions, even with the people who might have seemed difficult before.
That's great to hear. And that's what I love about this book. It really gives you practical strategies, things you can use every day.
Yeah.
Speaking of practical strategies, there's one more key element of persuasion we need to discuss. Timing.
Timing. Yeah, I have a feeling that's a crucial element, especially when it comes to, sensitive conversations or high stakes situations. Like, there's a good time to ask for a raise, and there's a really, really bad time.
Exactly. You wouldn't ask your boss for a raise right after they've had to deal with some major crisis, right?
Hmm.
You'd wait for a moment when they're more relaxed, more receptive,
Yeah.
maybe after, a successful product launch or a positive team meeting.
It's all about reading the room, right?
Mhm.
Picking up on those subtle cues, using your judgment to determine like the optimal time to make your move.
Precisely. The book really emphasizes that people are more receptive to persuasion when they're in a positive emotional state, when they feel heard and understood, when they're not feeling pressured or, rushed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know I'm much more likely to say yes to something when I'm, feeling happy and relaxed as opposed to stressed and overwhelmed.
Exactly. And it's not just about, big life decisions. It's about all those little everyday interactions where we're trying to, influence someone, whether it's convincing a friend to try a new restaurant or getting your partner to help with the dishes.
This reminds me of those times I've tried to like have a serious conversation with my partner while they're watching TV or scrolling through their phone. Needless to say, those conversations rarely go well.
That's a perfect example. They're not fully present.
Mhm.
They're not truly listening or engaging. Your message is, well, probably going in one ear and out the other.
So, how do we get better at this whole timing thing? How do we know, when the iron is hot?
It all comes back to empathy and observation. Push yourself in their shoes. Consider their circumstances, their emotional state, their priorities. Pay attention to their nonverbal cues. Are they giving you their full attention? Are they engaged? Or are they, distracted, dismissive?
Those are great points. Like, we need to become masters of observation and empathy, constantly assessing the situation and adjusting our approach.
Exactly. And remember, sometimes the most persuasive thing you can do is, well, just wait. If someone's not in the right frame of mind, it's better to postpone the conversation than to force it and risk creating, resistance.
That's good advice. It's a good reminder that patience and timing are just as important as, eloquence or charisma when it comes to persuasion. It's not just about what you say, it's about when you say it.
Exactly. We've covered so much in this deep dive, from ancient rhetoric to nonverbal communication, memory, strategic questioning.
And practical strategies for navigating personality types, handling those difficult people, and choosing the right moment for persuasion. It's been incredible.
But before we wrap up, I have to ask,
Hmm.
you mentioned Carl Jung's personality types earlier. I'm curious, which type are you?
Ah, that's a great question. I'm actually more of an introvert, but I've learned to adapt my communication style depending on the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like understanding your own personality is just as important as understanding, the personality types of those you're trying to persuade. Absolutely. Being aware of your own tendencies, your strengths and weaknesses, allows you to use them strategically. For example, as an introvert, I'm naturally a good listener, which is, well, a huge asset in persuasion.
That's a great point. It makes me wonder, what about you? Are you more introverted or extroverted?
Hmm, that's a good question. I actually fall somewhere in the middle, an ambivert, some might say. I enjoy social interaction, but I also need my alone time to recharge.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's not always black and white. But speaking of black and white, what about those other dimensions Jung talked about, sensing and intuition? Can you explain those a bit more?
Sure. So sensing types tend to be more practical, detail-oriented, while intuitive types are more imaginative, big picture focused. Sensing types like concrete facts and data, while intuitive types are drawn to, abstract concepts, possibilities.
So it's like two different ways of processing information, making decisions, and just like with introversion and extroversion, understanding these preferences can help you tailor your communication.
Exactly. If you're dealing with a sensing type, you want to be clear, concise, provide lots of evidence for your claims. With an intuitive type, you might focus more on the big picture, the vision, leave some room for interpretation.
This is making me want to go back and analyze all my past conversations. I'm starting to see how understanding personality types can really change the game.
It definitely can. And remember, it's not about putting people in boxes or stereotyping them. It's about having a framework for understanding how they think, how they process information, so you can communicate with them in a way that, well, resonates.
So, to recap, we've explored the foundations of persuasion, the power of listening, the importance of nonverbal communication, the magic of memory, the strategic art of asking questions.
Woohoo! That's a lot to take in. But it really all comes down to this. Persuasion isn't about manipulation. It's not about tricks. It's about understanding human psychology, building genuine connections, and communicating effectively.
And we've learned that there's no one size fits all approach. We got to be adaptable, observant, empathetic, and most importantly, be aware of our own, biases and communication styles.
Exactly. And remember, this is really just, scratching the surface. A Arte de Persuasão goes into much more detail. It's packed with practical exercises and real-life examples. If you're serious about mastering the art of persuasion, I highly recommend checking out the full book.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this part of our deep dive. We'll be back after a quick break to explore one more fascinating concept that ties everything together.
All right, we're back, ready to tie all these threads together. It's amazing how much goes into even a simple conversation, huh?
Yeah, it really is. And the book emphasizes it's not just about being, a smooth talker. Ethical persuasion, it relies on more than just technique. It's about, well, aligning your actions with your values.
Right. If you're trying to persuade someone of something you don't actually believe in, it's going to show,
Hmm.
no matter how slick you are with words. Exactly. So, building on everything we've discussed, let's talk about a concept that's central to uh, arte de persuasão, the idea of congruence.
Congruence. That sounds like something from geometry class.
It's actually a psychological concept. Basically, it means being genuine, being authentic, making sure your words, your actions, and your values are all aligned.
So it's not just about saying the right things, it's about living the right way.
Exactly. The book argues that people who are congruent, they're naturally more persuasive. They come across as trustworthy, believable. Their inner and outer worlds are in harmony, so there's no sense of dissonance or deception.
Yeah, I think we can all sense that, right? We're drawn to people who seem genuine, who walk their talk. We instinctively trust them more because they're not putting on an act.
Exactly. And the book goes on to explain that congruence, it's a powerful force for good. When people are living in alignment with their values, they're more likely to make ethical decisions, to act with integrity, and to inspire others to do the same.
That's a beautiful thought. Persuasion at its best. It's not about getting people to do what you want. It's about inspiring them to do what's right, what's authentic for them.
Exactly. And this is where it all comes full circle. Back to that ESP formula we talked about earlier. Empathy plus sincerity equals persuasion. When you approach persuasion with empathy and sincerity, when you're genuinely trying to understand and connect, well, you're more likely to act in a congruent way.
It's like a virtuous cycle. Empathy and sincerity lead to congruence, which then leads to more effective, more ethical persuasion.
Precisely. And the book, it makes the point that congruence isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's about continually striving to align your actions with your values, to be the best version of yourself.
That's a great reminder, I think, for all of us, no matter where we are on our persuasion journey. It's not about like achieving some perfect state of congruence. It's about making that conscious effort to be authentic, to live with integrity.
And the beauty of it is, the more congruent you become, the more persuasive you become. People are drawn to authenticity, and they're more likely to be influenced by someone who lives in alignment with their values.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. We've covered so much, ancient rhetoric, modern psycholinguistics, nonverbal communication, timing, congruence.
And it all boils down to this. Persuasion is a powerful tool. It's up to us to use it wisely and ethically. By understanding these principles from arte de persuasão, we can become better communicators, build stronger relationships, and make a positive impact on the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And if you enjoyed this deep dive and you want to learn more, I highly recommend checking out the full book, Arte de Persuasão by James Borg. It's packed with even more insights and practical advice.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey. We hope you've gained some valuable insights that will help you become a more persuasive and, well, a more influential force for good in the world.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep using your powers of persuasion to make a positive difference.